Joining us today for a conversation about the impacts of human trafficking here in South Central Pennsylvania and the resources available. We have two experts from the YWCAs of Lancaster and York. Andrea, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, my name is Andrea Smith. I'm lead clinician for YWCA Lancaster Sexual Assault Prevention and Counseling Center.
And my name is Crystal Perry, and I am the Community Education Director at YWCA York.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to start off with Andrea, talking a little bit about what human trafficking really looks like.
Yeah, human trafficking is the second most lucrative industry, crime industry after drug trafficking, and it's global as well as local to our community, but it usually is comprised of two components. One, labor trafficking, which is using force, fraud, or coercion to exploit somebody's work, and sex trafficking, using force, fraud, or coercion to use someone's body through sexual acts for profit.
Crystal, when we see this in the field, what is the most common form of human trafficking in South Central Pennsylvania right now?
YWCA York, we predominantly deal with sex trafficking, so that's a lot what we see, but I don't want to discredit labor. I believe they're right there together. But so many people are not sure, what they're looking for and stuff, so you might miss it.
The National Human Trafficking Hotline puts out numbers routinely, the last from 2021, showing Pennsylvania is number 15 in the nation in terms of the highest volume of calls. How significant, Andrea, is the problem in Pennsylvania right now?
We have many things that we're working towards putting in place around serving survivors of trafficking, but we have some pretty significant gaps. Pennsylvania is both a through state for moving people across state or county borders, but it's also a destination state for people to come to access survivors of trafficking. So it is a significant issue, and it's present in all of this corridor of 30 between DC, Baltimore, and New York City. We see a lot of movement along those lines and a lot of activity in this area. In Lancaster County, the Lancaster County Human Trafficking Task Force has focused primarily, especially on stings, looking at investigating and prosecuting both buyers and traffickers. The only reason we have human trafficking is because there's a demand. There are people who want to access either online or in person trafficking victims, and we use the term victims as a legal term, and the restoration work of working with trafficking survivors, we refer to them as survivors. They've come through a lot and some of the bravest people we know, but in the sense of the crime of trafficking, there were 43 stings in 2023 at the Lancaster County Human Trafficking Task Force, and those included buyers coming from all of the surrounding counties, coming from as far as Maryland. So it is a widespread issue that's impacting our entire region.
How has the advent of the internet and the communication that happens there through social media, through other various platforms, kind of made this a little easier, or how has it impacted human trafficking? Since
COVID, it's exploded. There were so many people just stuck within their homes and on the computer, and it hasn't seemed to let up. One of the biggest things for 2023 that I noticed, and talking with some of our safe nurses at our local hospitals, is the children that are coming through and the level of abuse. And there's some different opinions. Some people think because of being stuck in the house for so long, things were going unreported, and now there's an influx in being reported, but just the severity. And so many of them are kids online thinking they're talking to other kids. And we've gotten so many calls like, hey, listen, we got a report of a missing child. We believe they might be traveling through your area. Can you get the word out? And that could be from PA going out, or like you said, from another state coming in, but so many of them. And when we used to do education, we would always train, look for the runaway youth, look for the troubled youth. People think that's it, but now with the internet, we're inviting these people into our homes essentially, and it doesn't matter. It could be that perfect white picket fence home, yet these people now have access. They're good at it. They're good at targeting our children. They wait for that one little loophole, that one little post that I had a bad day at school, or somebody didn't like my outfit, and they can comment. And when you think you're talking to somebody your age that understands what you're going through and looking for that support, it's easy to be drawn in. So I think, I can't speak for Lancaster, but for York, That has been our biggest for 2023, is the amount of youth.
In Lancaster County, the most predominant form of trafficking that we see is called a Romeo pimp scenario. Most trafficking survivors are trafficked by a family member or significant other, somebody that they trust. And the Romeo pimp scenario, it's the pimp, the trafficker, has connected with that person in a way that they believe, like, this is my boyfriend, this is somebody who cares about me, and if they're asking me to do this, well, they care about me and they're providing something that I need, whether it's that type of connection or housing or opportunities. Like, there is something in it for that survivor where they might not recognize that they're a victim of trafficking.
When we talk about this issue, you spoke both, I think, of the vulnerability that these survivors have, that generally they're being targeted because they are vulnerable. How crucial is housing when it comes to that? I mean, that's one that if you don't have a place to go, that's an easy door, it would seem, for a potential trafficker. Hey, come stay with me. How big of a problem has that been?
Massive. One of the vulnerabilities that we look for are people who are insufficiently housed, like they're couch surfing, going from house to house because they don't have somewhere to stay, or don't have their own housing. So somebody who can offer a warm place to sleep at night, it's really cold right now, and somebody who's saying, like, hey, no, like, we've been talking anyway, you've been having a really rough time, your family doesn't get you, you can just come stay with me, like, that's totally fine. We also see as a factor for exiting the life is, I don't know where I would go. Like, this is where I live, this is what I have. So part of our role, YWCA Lancaster's role on the Lancaster County Human Trafficking Task Force, is seeking to provide some of those housing options for people who might be exiting the life after seeing they have an option. They've connected with law enforcement and, like, hey, we can get you somewhere else. We collaborate with other county rape crisis centers to specifically look at that issue because it's a massive one. We don't have the internal infrastructure or resources to be able to meet that need to the degree that we need to be able to meet it.
A lot of people have heard stories about there's not enough homeless shelters. You hear that, there's code blue, there's not enough beds. Well, we don't just deal with that on code blue days. Yeah. There's not enough beds for survivors. And when you are then adding on the fact that we service human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, there's not enough. So if you think about a two-income household that is struggling to afford rent, and then you think about a survivor just coming out of the life and possibly did some job training and things like that, but still need to make enough to get that first, last, next, all the different deposits they're asking for in the credit checks. I recently was told that most of the people are asking for at least a $700 credit check. Our survivors don't have that. So we can do everything we can do as a service provider and still hit that brick wall of what next? Yeah. So now we're seeing these survivors stay with us longer, which means the bed are staying full or longer, which means we can't take that next person. So it's really hit us hard.
If someone is stuck in this cycle right now, or in the life, as you say, what are the ways that they can make that first step and reach out? Or does it often take somebody else advocating for them or coming to their aid, saying someone is experiencing this?
I think in my experience, and again, I'm only going to speak for myself, every survivor I've ever worked with has come into contact with someone that cared. Whether it was a service provider, somebody they worked alongside of, a community member, it was always someone. We talk about in domestic violence, that person goes back average 7 times before they can leave successfully. And in human trafficking, it's 9. So to get those support systems, because one of the first things that trafficker does is get rid of their support system. Yeah. So to be that person. Don't be that person that says, oh, they keep going back, so they must have deserved it or they wanted it. Be that person that says, I don't care how many times you go back. Be that person that believes them, that is there for them, and that does not quit on them.
We can make our communities trafficking proof by closing some of those gaps, saying, I see you. One of the things that traffickers look for is that vulnerability, a history of trauma, a history of abuse, and somebody that nobody's going to notice is gone. And so if we as a community are looking for, like, hey, I'm a school counselor, and this kid is like, we see all these respect issues or truancy issues, and maybe we're not asking the right questions. Like, do you have what you need? Like, do you feel safe? Do you know who's coming for you later? Do you need somewhere to rest? Becoming a safe presence in our community, to be watching for it, to know what we're looking for, and make our community trafficking proof. because that comes out of connection. Vulnerability is protected by connection and protected by awareness, and that's something that anybody in our community is able to do. We of course have resources, but some of it's just seeing our neighbors and being willing to ask uncomfortable questions and risk being told no, just to make sure that somebody else is safe.
On that note, can you go through some of those signs and what people should be looking out for as we try to combat this issue?
So usually it's going to be a combination of several factors. The biggest one just being isolation. Somebody who doesn't seem to have a lot of connection points with someone else. Someone who seems to have a much older boyfriend or girlfriend and can't answer for themselves, are looking for somebody else to speak into that. Often it will be, especially in youth, suddenly having much more expensive items than they like. Where would you have gotten the money for that? For things like apparel or electronics that don't seem to be congruent. Somebody who doesn't have a consistent home address. An older survivor, though, will often have like a $ or a specific tag as a tattoo. That's enough you can ask questions like, hey, what does that tattoo mean to you?
Trust your gut.
Yeah.
You know, if you have had this relationship with somebody, whether it's work, just in the community, whatever, and something about them starts to change.
Yeah.
They start to avoid you, or maybe they look like they're struggling, or any of those things. Trust your gut. I think so many people are so afraid of offending somebody or being wrong that they don't ask or they don't say something. Yeah. And most of the time your gut feeling is right. If you are noticing something, talk to them. Because even if you're wrong, you planted a seed that you care. And if they ever do go through something, they might come to you.
Yeah. And as a community member, a lot of the things that happen in both of our counties is because a community member noticed something, hey, something's really off. Like there's this house in my neighborhood, a lot of cars just seem to drive up to it, but nobody ever leaves. Or there's this massage parlor around the corner from my business, and I just the windows are all boarded up and I never see the women go anywhere who are in there. And they reported it. You can submit that as a tip line. You can go through the Crime Watch website on either of our counties and say hey, I just think somebody should check this out. It feels off. And that gut feeling of something, it requires noticing though and paying attention to what's going on around us. And that sometimes is the hardest part, being able to ask an uncomfortable question and potentially risk being wrong. But that care is worth it to ask if someone's safe.
This is an issue that affects women more so than it does men, but is there also a market for men to be trafficked out there, and how significant is that issue?
Oh yes, men, people of color, our BIPOC population, and our LGBTQ plus population. These are populations with the highest numbers, but because we had talked earlier about images, a lot of the images from 10, 15 years ago were always young girls, and a lot of people think, oh, it's just girls, but no. One of the things I love about YWCA York is we take in anyone. We help every victim. Some shelters don't have the capacity. Some may be female identifying, male identifying, or specifics. But I love shelters that can do what they can to help everyone. Men and boys can definitely bring in more money. We've had clients tell us they were considered exotic. So they, could be $5,000 a night because they're exotic.
It's still about 60% women who are impacted by trafficking, but LGBTQ youth and transgender people are statistically way more at risk for trafficking than many other populations because of that piece of vulnerability and isolation. People who we overlook as a society and a culture who aren't included in our communities are people who are going to be statistically more likely to be trafficked.
Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing and some of the potential solutions here. The Lancaster County Human Trafficking Task Force started up recently. What's the goal there, and how important is that connection between law enforcement and between counselors and other clinicians like yourself?
Yeah, so the Lancaster County Human Trafficking Task Force has 3 different prongs to its approach. One of them is collaborating with law enforcement to investigate and prosecute through stings, and then expanding the continuum of care, so including that housing piece, looking at long-term support for survivors, because it takes a long time, looking at counseling and trauma-informed therapy and things along those lines, and then also the third arm of what we're doing now, prevention, education, and awareness, and building more of an understanding. It's an area that as a state overall, Pennsylvania is not done as well at, of being aware of what to pay attention to, and so this is a big piece of it.
And in York County, what are the efforts underway right now? Obviously, there's some fundraising going on this weekend.
Yep, so some of our short term, this weekend we have our Justice Gala. It's in memory of my anti-trafficking case manager that passed away over the summer. Her name was Jessica Hummel. It's our first ever, it's a black tie event. We're really excited about it. And then next weekend we have Red Sand, and if people aren't familiar with Red Sand, it started in California, and it's putting sand in the cracks of sidewalks. It gets people to ask questions, and basically it's showing that how we can all work together to fill the cracks so survivors don't fall through the cracks. Yeah. Some of our long-term, we've added a human trafficking case manager that is actually mobile, so you don't have to come to our services. They will go to different facilities. So if you are dealing with addiction and you're an inpatient somewhere, we can actually come to you and start case management. So that way, like you were saying about that wraparound care. So you're not telling your story to this person here, then going to another program. So we're really proud of that. We're gonna have an app coming out soon that a lot of people can do a lot of education with, learn with. You can get help through it, things like that. We have a bunch of different shelter options. We have emergency shelter, long-term shelter options, and just a lot of good things.
As we continue to expand that continuum of care, one of the things is there are already a lot of professionals who are working with kids and with teens who are impacted by trauma. And so in Lancaster, we're offering on February 15th the Empowering Growth Childhood Trauma Care Conference, looking at people in our community who work with kids and teens impacted by trauma. And we have a specific breakout session on commercial sexual exploitation of children to look a little bit more specifically in depth around some of those risk factors and how to identify them for people who are already working in the field.
You're both kind of working towards the same goal here, which I can imagine is putting an end to human trafficking. But Crystal, what is that going to take, and is part of that going to be a societal change?
One of my big pushes right now is a lot of people are aware that Pennsylvania has the Buyer Beware Act, and basically if you're charged, if you're caught buying, that you're supposed to pay in this fund. But we're ranking pretty low in collecting that, and I think if we hold buyers to a high standard, to all of those penalties and things, that could help. We're in one of the top states for actually prosecution of traffickers, so we're doing great work there. Yeah. But we still need a lot of work with making the buyers, because without that demand, again, education, getting out there, teaching people. We do a lot of work with at-risk youth, so that way, you know, really either one, hoping they don't become a victim because of the education, or two, knowing that when you age out of the systems you may be in now, we're here for you.
There is a community-wide need for this around that awareness piece. And I loved something that you said earlier, Crystal, about being patient, kind of adjusting our understanding of what trafficking is. It's not the unmarked white van in the parking lot abducting children. Not that there aren't other bad actors, but when we think about trafficking, it's reducing that vulnerability and understanding the impact of someone's story on what it might look for them moving forward, and being able to approach that with compassion and understanding and being aware of the resources that are available to be able to support them.
I thank you both for being here and having this difficult discussion. Obviously, you're both very entrenched in trying to solve this problem. Thank you, Crystal, Andrea, for being here with us today. If you or someone you know has been impacted by human trafficking, you can call the number on your screen to get immediate help, and we'll have more information on our website, fox43.com.